They thought the badge in her purse was fake, but the silence in her eyes said they were the ones about to be exposed. The morning air in downtown Washington, D.C. carried that cold, metallic bite that settled into your lungs before the sun had fully warmed the glass towers and federal stone. People moved fast along the sidewalk with coffee cups, messenger bags, and the practiced impatience of a city built on clearance levels and closed doors. No one expected the scene that erupted near the entrance to the federal office annex on Constitution Avenue. 1 minute. Naomi Carter was walking with steady, unhurried purpose, her dark navy coat buttoned neatly against the wind, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm, her expression calm in the way that made some people uneasy without knowing why. The next, 2 city police officers stepped into her path like they had been waiting for the chance. Officer Derek Haynes was the first to speak, his voice loud enough to turn heads half a block away. "Ma'am, stop right there. Show me that badge again." Naomi stopped, not because she looked afraid, but because she looked like someone measuring the cost of every second. She reached slowly into her coat pocket and produced a credential holder, holding it up just enough for him to see. Haynes took one glance and let out a short, mocking laugh. "You expect me to believe this? FBI." Beside him, Officer Cole Mercer folded his arms and shook his head, already acting like the verdict had been delivered. Naomi's face did not change. Her eyes moved from one officer to the other, then briefly to the growing crowd gathering around them. A young intern in a gray suit slowed down. A delivery driver paused beside the curb. Someone across the street lifted a phone and started recording. "Call your supervisor," Naomi said, her voice level, controlled, almost quiet. Haynes smirked like she had just confirmed every suspicion he wanted to have. "That's cute. You people always say that when the story starts falling apart." The words hung in the air, ugly and deliberate, and even the crowd seemed to feel the shift. Naomi did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply held his stare with a stillness that made Mercer glance away first. Haynes snatched the credential from her hand, flipped it over, and flashed it toward Mercer, as if showing off a cheap fake at a county fair. "Look at this. She's walking around federal property pretending to be FBI." Naomi tightened her grip on the leather folder under her arm. "Officer," she said, "you are making a mistake you won't be able to undo." That should have been the moment to pause. That should have been the moment for someone with training, instinct, or plain common sense to slow the whole thing down. But power mixed with arrogance has a way of making men feel taller than the truth. Haynes stepped closer. "Turn around." A murmur rolled through the sidewalk crowd. Naomi's jaw set, but she complied, slow and dignified, as if refusing to let humiliation rewrite who she was. The metal click of handcuffs cut through the street noise like a judge's gavel. Somewhere behind them, a woman whispered, "Oh my God." Mercer reached for Naomi's folder. "What's in this?" Naomi turned her head slightly. "Don't open that." Haynes laughed again, but this time there was something sharp beneath it, something restless. "Now she's giving orders." Naomi looked straight ahead at the federal building doors only 50 feet away, then up at the security camera mounted over the entrance. When she spoke again, her voice was low enough that only the officers heard it. "If that call hasn't come yet," she said, "it will." Naomi did not resist as they guided her across the sidewalk, but the stillness in her face unsettled everyone more than panic ever could. Washington moved around her the way it always did, brisk and indifferent, but now the rhythm had changed. People slowed without meaning to. Shoes clicked against concrete. A bus sighed at the corner. A man in a charcoal overcoat stopped just long enough to stare, then kept walking as though he had seen something he did not want attached to his conscience. The wind funneled between the federal buildings and lifted the edge of Naomi's coat, carrying with it the smell of roasted coffee, engine exhaust, and the cold stone scent of government corridors that had swallowed too many stories. Before breakfast, Officer Derek Haynes walked half a step ahead of her like he had already decided how this would end. Officer Cole Mercer stayed to her side, one hand near her elbow, not rough, not gentle, just certain in the way people become when they mistake authority for accuracy. "You should have thought this through," Haynes said over his shoulder. "Federal impersonation is not some prank. You are in real trouble now." Naomi kept her gaze forward. The federal office annex loomed to her left, its broad limestone face glowing pale under a weak winter sun. Tall windows reflected the traffic crawling down Constitution Avenue, and above the main doors the security camera remained fixed, patient, and unblinking. She noticed everything. The guard at the entrance speaking into an earpiece. The woman in a burgundy scarf pretending not to record. The delivery van idling at the curb with its back door open 2 feet. The exact time on the digital bus display across the street. 8:14 in the morning. She held each detail the way other people held fear. Say something, Mercer muttered, not quite looking at her. If there is an explanation, now would be the time. Naomi turned her head just enough for him to hear her clearly. There is an explanation, she said. You are choosing not to hear it. Haynes let out a dry laugh. No, what I am hearing is somebody who got caught with a fake badge and thinks speaking calmly makes it believable. He waved the credential holder in the air before slipping it into his jacket pocket like a trophy. Naomi's eyes followed the motion for only a second. Then she looked at the revolving doors ahead, where government employees passed through layers of glass without ever glancing back. Imagine standing there, cuffed in public, surrounded by people who would rather trust a uniform than a woman who never once lost control of her voice. Imagine knowing the truth would clear the room in an instant, yet saying nothing because timing mattered more than pride. That was the weight Naomi carried without letting it bend her posture. When they reached the patrol vehicle parked along the curb, Haynes opened the rear door with unnecessary flourish and nodded toward the seat. Last chance, he said. Tell us who made that badge for you. Naomi paused before stepping in. Her reflection flashed faintly in the tinted window, steady eyes, composed mouth, not a trace of pleading. You are asking the wrong question, she said. Haynes folded his arms. Then help me out. Naomi met his stare, and for the first time something uncertain flickered behind his expression, small but real. The right question, she said, is who is going to call first. For a beat, the city noise seemed to thin around them. A siren moaned somewhere in the distance. A flag snapped sharply from a pole across the avenue. Mercer frowned, as if he had just remembered something he could not place. Haynes brushed it aside and jerked his chin toward the car. Naomi stepped in without another word. As the door shut and the outside world narrowed to glass and muffled motion, she looked down at her cuffed hands, then back up at the federal building disappearing behind them. She did not look defeated. She looked like someone counting down to impact. The ride to the precinct took less than 10 minutes, but inside the back of that patrol car time stretched in strange ways, measured not by miles or stoplights, but by the tightening pressure in the air. Naomi sat upright against the stiff vinyl seat, her cuffed hands resting neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the shifting reflection of the city in the partition glass. Government buildings gave way to narrower streets, older brick, corner delis, a pharmacy with a flickering window sign, and a row of bare trees shaking in the cold. Officer Derek Haynes drove with one wrist hooked over the steering wheel, talking more to feed his own confidence than to get answers. I have seen every version of this, he said. Fake credentials, fake names, fake stories. Everybody thinks they can bluff their way into power. In the front passenger seat, Officer Cole Mercer remained quieter, though not calm. He kept glancing down at Naomi's credential holder, which he had asked to inspect twice since they left Constitution Avenue. The seal, the laminate, the weight of it in his hand, none of it felt cheap. There was even a small embedded strip near the bottom, something official-looking enough to bother him. It is a good fake, Haynes said when he noticed Mercer staring. That is why people fall for them. Mercer nodded, but the motion lacked conviction. Naomi said nothing. She watched the reflection of a church steeple pass in the glass, then a school crossing sign, then the pale winter sky opening between buildings like a warning no one else could read. Her silence was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of someone who understood that the loudest sound in the room had not arrived yet. When the car pulled into the station lot, the building looked exactly like the kind of place where mistakes learned to wear paperwork as a disguise. Red brick darkened by years of rain. Narrow windows. A flag hanging almost still above the entrance. A half-faded sign near the side door warning that all visitors were subject to search. Naomi stepped out when the rear door opened, the cold hitting her face with a clean, dry edge. Inside, the station smelled of burnt coffee, old files, printer toner, and the stale heat that came from vents working harder than they should. Phones rang in short bursts. A copier whined somewhere down the hall. A television mounted in the corner played a morning news segment with the volume too low to follow. Two officers behind the front desk looked up, then looked again when they saw Naomi in cuffs. It was not concern in their eyes. It was that familiar, practiced curiosity people get when they think the story has already been decided for them. Haynes placed Naomi's credential holder on the counter with a casual tap. Federal impersonation, he announced. She was walking around the annex claiming she was bureau. One desk sergeant, a broad man with silver at his temples and reading glasses low on his nose, picked up the credential and turned it under the fluorescent lights. For a second, his expression hardened into concentration. "Where did you stop her?" he asked. "Constitution," Haynes said. "Near the federal entrance." The sergeant's eyes flicked up, then back to the credential. "And she just handed this over?" Naomi answered before Haynes could. "I asked him to call his supervisor." Her voice cut clean through the room, low but unmistakable. Haynes turned toward her with irritation sharpened by the fact that everyone had heard. "You do not get to direct this process." Naomi met his glare without flinching. "No," she said, "but I can still tell you when it is failing." A younger clerk at the far desk paused with a stack of forms in his hand. Mercer looked away first, again. Haynes took the credential back from the sergeant and slipped it into an evidence envelope with exaggerated care, as though procedure itself could rescue his certainty. Naomi was led down a narrow hallway toward an interview room with cinder block walls painted a tired shade of beige. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed like distant static. The room itself was small, cold, and painfully ordinary. A metal table bolted to the floor. 3 chairs. A dark camera dome in the upper corner. A legal pad left behind by someone else's unfinished trouble. Haynes pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. Naomi lowered herself into it with the same quiet composure she had carried all morning. He remained standing, palms on the table, posture broad with authority. "Here is how this is going to work," he said. "You are going to tell me your real name, who gave you that credential, and why you thought federal property was the place to try this." Naomi looked up at him, then at the camera, then back at the door. "My real name is Naomi Carter," she said. "And before this room gets much quieter, I suggest you start deciding which version of today you want on record." For the first time that morning, the room did not belong entirely to Officer Derek Haynes. Naomi could feel it in the silence that followed her words, in the way even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow sharper, in the way Officer Cole Mercer remained near the door instead of stepping fully into the performance Derek was trying to stage. The interview room had no warmth to offer anyone. The walls were plain, the table scarred by years of nervous hands and impatient fists, the air too cool for comfort. It was the kind of room designed to make people feel smaller than their own names. Yet Naomi sat there as if the space had failed to understand who it was built for. Derek pulled out the chair across from her and dropped into it with a confidence that sounded louder than it felt. He opened a legal pad, clicked his pen, and leaned back like a man preparing to dismantle a lie he had already convicted. "Let us try this again," he said. "You claim your name is Naomi Carter. You claim you are connected to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And somehow, when approached outside a restricted federal site, you thought refusing to cooperate would help your case." Naomi rested her cuffed hands on the metal table and tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in restraint. "I cooperated," she said. "I handed over my credential. I told you to verify it. You chose theater instead." Derek's expression tightened. "No, what I chose was common sense." He slid the evidence envelope onto the table and tapped it twice with his pen. "People who belong in those buildings do not walk around making cryptic threats." "I did not threaten you," Naomi replied. "I warned you." Mercer shifted near the door. It was a small movement, but in a room this tight, small things echoed. Derek noticed it and pressed on harder, his voice carrying the brittle edge of someone who needed control more than truth. "You know what I think," he said. "I think you counted on that badge and that attitude getting you through the front door, because most people are too intimidated to ask questions." Naomi held his gaze with the same composed stillness that had followed her from the sidewalk to the station. "And I think," she said, "you saw a black woman with federal credentials and decided that disbelief was easier than procedure." The words landed with quiet force. Mercer looked down. Derek did not. His jaw flexed, and for a brief second the room exposed him more clearly than any confession could have. Not because he had been shouted down, because she had named the thing he wanted hidden inside authority. Careful, he said, voice low now. You do not get to turn this into something it is not. Naomi's answer came without hesitation. It became that the moment you stopped checking facts and started checking whether I looked like someone you were willing to believe. Outside the room, footsteps passed in the hallway. A printer started and stopped. Somewhere deeper in the station, a phone rang once, then again, then a third time before someone picked up. Derek flipped open the evidence envelope, removed the credential, and laid it flat on the table between them. Under the overhead light, the seal caught a dull gleam. The embedded strip near the bottom reflected in a way cheap plastic never did. Mercer stepped closer without meaning to. There is a serial code on the back, he said. Derek shot him a look. And fake cards come with details now. Mercer did not answer. Naomi glanced at the credential, but did not reach for it. Run the number, she said. Call the Bureau field office. Or better yet, call the contact listed in the internal verification block. Derek gave a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. You really came prepared for this fantasy. Naomi's expression never broke. No, she said softly. For this country. The room went still again. Imagine being so certain of your own power that calm sounds like defiance. Imagine mistaking dignity for deception because the person carrying it does not fit the story you have always trusted. Derek turned the credential over in his hand, slower this time. On the back, beneath the printed clearance markings, was a small number sequence and a line of text that made Mercer narrow his eyes. He leaned in just enough to read it fully, and something changed in his face. Not belief. Not yet. But the beginning of fear. Derek saw it and straightened. What? He asked. Mercer swallowed once before answering. There is a secondary verification line, he said, and it is not routed through the Bureau. Derek frowned. Then where? Mercer looked at Naomi, then back at the card, his voice quieter now than it had been all morning. The Pentagon. The word hung in the room like a crack in glass. Pentagon. Not spoken loudly, not delivered with drama, but once it was there, nothing sounded the same after it. Officer Derek Haynes did not move for a second. His fingers remained on the credential, his pen still resting beside the legal pad. But the confidence he had worn all morning shifted into something thinner, something forced. Officer Cole Mercer kept his eyes on the back of the card as if reading it again might somehow change what was printed there. Naomi Carter sat exactly as she had before, her posture straight, her cuffed hands quiet on the table, her face composed in a way that now felt less mysterious and more dangerous. Derek gave a short laugh, the kind people use when they need a room to believe them before they believe themselves. That does not prove anything, he said. Anybody can print words on plastic. Mercer did not answer right away. He took the credential carefully from Derek's hand and turned it under the fluorescent light. The seal, the embedded strip, the fine microprint near the edge, the secondary routing line. Every detail seemed to argue against the story Derek wanted this to be. This is not standard fake stuff, Mercer said quietly. It has layered security markers. Derek leaned forward. Then somebody spent money. Naomi finally looked from one man to the other. You still have choices, she said. That window is getting smaller. Derek's eyes hardened again, but now anger had to work harder because uncertainty had entered the room and refused to leave. You keep talking like the rest of us are behind, he said. So let me ask you plainly. If you are who you say you are, why are you carrying a bureau credential with Pentagon routing? Naomi held his stare, and when she answered, her voice carried no pride, only precision. Because not every federal assignment belongs inside one building. That should have been enough to make him stop. Enough to make the air in the room tilt in another direction. But people who build their identity around being right do not surrender easily. Derek pushed back his chair and stood. I am not getting played by a story with acronyms in it. He took the credential back, slid it into the evidence envelope again, and tucked it under the legal pad as though hiding it from view could simplify what it meant. We verify the old-fashioned way. Naomi glanced at the wall clock above the door. 8:29. Her expression did not change, but Mercer noticed. He had started noticing all the small things now. The way she tracked time. The way she never once asked for sympathy. The way she spoke like someone who understood process better than the people controlling it. Derek, he said, keeping his voice low, we should run the number before this goes any further. Derek turned sharply. And say what? That we found someone near federal property with a suspicious card? and now we want the Pentagon to hold our hand. Mercer did not back off. I am saying the card gives us a path. We should use it. Naomi looked toward the dark camera dome in the corner, then back to Derek. Do that, she said. And make sure whoever answers hears the exact reason I was detained. Derek gave her a cold smile. You really think somebody at that level is waiting around for you? Naomi's reply came like ice on steel. No, I think they are waiting for a check-in that has already been delayed. For the first time all morning, Derek said nothing. Outside the interview room, the station continued in its ordinary rhythm. Phones ringing, chairs scraping, muted conversations rising and falling through the hallway. But inside that room, ordinary had started to crack. Mercer reached for the desk phone mounted near the wall. His hand hovered for a moment. Not because he feared Naomi, because he feared what the truth might do to everything that had already happened. Derek noticed the hesitation and snatched the receiver first. Fine, he said, punching in the number from the back of the credential with more force than necessary. Let us settle this. Naomi watched him in silence as each tone sounded into the line, one after another, steady and clean. No one spoke. The room seemed to narrow around the ring, around the hum, around the invisible path racing out of that little station and into a world Derek had spent the morning pretending did not apply to her. Then the call connected. Derek straightened instinctively, and a sharp professional voice came through the receiver before he could say a word. Office of the Secretary of Defense Secure Operations Desk. State your agency, your badge number, and explain why this verification request is being made without the scheduled access confirmation from Agent Naomi Carter. The words on the other end of the line did not sound confused. They did not sound uncertain. They sounded like the kind of voice that lived above panic, above local mistakes, above the everyday confidence of men who thought a uniform made them untouchable. For the first time that morning, Officer Derek Haynes looked exactly like what he had spent the last hour refusing to become, unsure. His grip tightened on the receiver, but the sharpness in his posture had started to fray. This is Officer Derek Haynes, Metropolitan Police, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. We detained an individual carrying credentials identifying her as Agent Naomi Carter. We are conducting a verification due to suspected impersonation. There was no immediate reply, only the soft rustle of papers, or perhaps keyboards, the distant hum of a secure room somewhere far beyond the cinder block walls of that station. Then the voice returned, colder now. Repeat the name. Derek swallowed once. Naomi Carter. Across the table, Naomi did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on him, calm and unreadable. But there was something else there now, not satisfaction, not triumph. Just the quiet recognition of a process reaching the place it should have reached an hour ago. Mercer stood very still by the wall phone mount, every muscle in his face caught between dread and disbelief. The voice on the line came back with precision that landed like a door locking into place. Agent Carter was scheduled to arrive at a restricted interagency coordination briefing at 0820. Her delayed clearance check triggered an escalation review 3 minutes ago. Who authorized her detention? The room went still. Derek opened his mouth, but no answer came out fast enough to sound confident. He looked at Mercer as though someone else's face might rescue him from his own. We made a judgment call based on the circumstances, he said at last. What circumstances? The voice asked. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Derek glanced toward Naomi, then away from her. We believed the credential might not be authentic. Believed based on what verification procedure? Silence. Imagine standing in that room and watching the balance of power shift without anyone raising their voice. Imagine hearing a man who had spent the morning acting like certainty itself suddenly discover that procedure is a ladder, and some people have spent their whole lives pretending they were already at the top. Derek cleared his throat. The field assessment suggested irregularity. Naomi lowered her eyes for 1 second, not in defeat, but in weary understanding, as if she had heard this language too many times in too many rooms. Field assessment. Irregularity. Clean words for dirty instincts. The voice on the line spoke again. Officer Haynes, listen carefully. Agent Carter is attached to a joint federal task review under temporary cross-agency authority. Her bureau credential routes through defense because her access today concerns a matter of national security coordination. You are instructed to remove restraints immediately Return all seized materials, and prepare to identify every officer involved in the stop, transport, and detention. Do you understand? Derek's face lost color by degrees, not all at once, but enough for Mercer to notice. Enough for the whole room to notice. Yes, he said, though the word came out smaller than anything he had said all morning. Good, the voice replied. You will remain available. A supervisory response team is already en route. The line clicked dead. No dramatic ending. No shouted threat. Just the end of doubt. Derek remained standing there with the receiver still in his hand, as though letting go of it would make everything that had just happened fully real. Mercer looked at Naomi, then at the cuffs on her wrists, then back at Derek. In the hallway beyond the interview room, ordinary station noise continued for another few seconds, but now it sounded distant, irrelevant, like weather outside a courtroom where the verdict had already been read. Naomi lifted her eyes to Derek again. You asked why my credential routed through the Pentagon, she said softly. Now you know. Derek set the receiver back into its cradle with exaggerated care, the kind people use when they are trying not to let their hands betray them. He stared at the table, at the legal pad, at the evidence envelope, at every object except the woman he had judged before verifying a single fact. Mercer stepped forward first. I should take those off, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi turned slightly toward him, not cruel, not forgiving, just steady. Yes, she said. You should. Mercer moved first because Derek could not. That was the truth of it. In every room where power begins to collapse, there is always one person who still understands the difference between delay and damage. Mercer stepped to Naomi's side with careful hands, his face stripped of the certainty he had carried on the sidewalk, and reached for the cuffs without a word. The metal released with a quiet click that sounded far louder than it should have. Naomi lowered her hands slowly, rubbing neither wrist, showing no visible sign of discomfort, only the same measured control she had carried from the moment they stopped her. Derek remained standing across the table, shoulders squared by habit, not confidence, his eyes fixed on the evidence envelope as if procedure might still save him from what procedure had already documented. Naomi rose from the chair with unhurried grace, and somehow that made the room smaller for everyone else. Mercer picked up her credential from the envelope and offered it back with both hands, almost formal now. Agent Carter, he said, his voice tight, your identification. Naomi took it, checked the edge, the embedded strip, the photo window, then slipped it back inside her coat with the kind of precision that said she had done this 1,000 times in rooms where someone doubted she belonged. She then extended her hand slightly toward the leather folder Mercer had placed on a side chair earlier. He passed it to her at once. She opened it just enough to confirm the contents were untouched, then closed it again. Only after every item had been returned did she look directly at Derek. He had built the entire morning around forcing her to explain herself. Now explanation stood in front of him, and he looked like a man who had no language prepared for it. You should have verified first, Naomi said. Her tone was not raised. It did not need to be. I know, Derek answered, but even that sounded incomplete, like a sentence missing the part that mattered most. Naomi tilted her head a fraction. No, she said. You knew how? You chose not to. The words settled into the room harder than any accusation shouted in anger ever could. Mercer looked down. Derek finally met her eyes, and for the first time all morning there was no performance in him, no smirk, no edge, no borrowed authority. Just the first raw outline of consequence. I made a mistake, he said. Naomi held his gaze for a beat that felt longer than the whole ride to the station. You made several, she replied. Outside the interview room, the hallway had started to change. Voices rose, then lowered. A desk chair rolled quickly across tile. Someone near the front of the station said the word federal in a tone that turned ordinary conversation into alertness. A uniformed supervisor appeared in the doorway, paused when he saw Naomi standing uncuffed, and then disappeared again without asking a single question, as if instinct had told him the next 5 minutes would determine more than paperwork. Mercer glanced toward the hall, then back to Naomi. They said a supervisory team was coming, he asked. Naomi nodded once. They are already close. Derek ran a hand over the back of his neck, a gesture too human for the man who had spent the morning acting carved from certainty. Who are you really? He asked before he could stop himself. Naomi answered without drama, without flourish, without trying to make herself sound larger than she was. She did not need to. I am a federal agent assigned to a joint review unit with temporary cross-agency access through the Department of Defense. I was due at a restricted briefing at 8:20. Instead, I spent the last 40 minutes proving I exist to men who saw my skin before they saw my credentials. No one in the room moved. Imagine the weight of that truth landing after all the excuses have run out. Imagine knowing the woman you dismissed had never needed to become more powerful than you believed. She only needed the system to finally do what it claimed it always did. A sharp sound came from the front of the station, the heavy glass door opening, followed by footsteps measured enough to quiet a whole lobby without a single command. Mercer turned first. Derek followed a second later. Naomi did not turn right away. She only adjusted the collar of her coat, took one controlled breath, and looked toward the hallway with the calm of someone who had been waiting not for rescue, but for record. Then the first dark suits appeared at the end of the corridor, and the room changed all over again. The men in dark suits did not rush, and that was what made the station fall silent. They moved with the kind of calm that comes from never needing to prove authority once it enters a room. The first was a woman in a charcoal overcoat over a navy suit, her posture sharp, her expression unreadable, a silver credential case visible for only a second before it disappeared back beneath the lapel. Behind her came two others, one carrying a slim case, the other already scanning the hallway with the detached focus of someone trained to notice everything and react to nothing. The desk sergeant straightened before they even reached the front counter. A patrol officer near the copier stepped aside without being asked. By the time the lead woman reached the interview room door, the entire station seemed to understand that whatever had happened that morning no longer belonged to local control. She stopped at the threshold and looked first at Naomi Carter, then at Officer Derek Haynes, then at Officer Cole Mercer. Her eyes were steady, clinical, and entirely unimpressed. "Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Sloan," she said, producing her credentials just long enough for no one to mistake what they were seeing. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. With me are representatives from Defense Counterintelligence Coordination. Which one of you detained Agent Carter?" No one answered right away. Derek did not step forward. Mercer did not speak. The silence itself became its own admission. Naomi remained near the table, leather folder in hand, no longer a suspect, no longer forced into stillness, but somehow even more commanding now that the room had finally aligned with the truth. Rebecca Sloan took 2 steps inside, the heels of her shoes striking the tile with measured finality. "Let me make something clear," she said. Agent Carter was due at a restricted joint briefing tied to an ongoing federal review. Her missed access confirmation triggered immediate escalation through the Department of Defense. Every minute of delay after that became part of a federal incident log. Derek's face tightened. "We believe the credential was fraudulent," he said, trying to recover ground that no longer existed. Sloan turned toward him, and her expression did not shift even a fraction. "Believed based on what verification?" Derek opened his mouth, but his answer never found the shape it needed. Sloan did not wait for it. "You stopped a cleared federal agent near a secured government facility, ignored her request for supervisory verification, transported her to a local station, and initiated detention before completing basic credential confirmation. Is that an accurate sequence?" Mercer lowered his eyes. Derek said nothing. Sloan looked to the man beside her, who opened the slim case and removed a tablet. "We will need all body camera footage, dash camera footage, dispatch audio, desk logs, hallway video, and interview room recordings from the moment of first contact to present," she said. "Nothing is to be edited, delayed, summarized, or rerouted through internal review before federal preservation." Imagine standing there after spending an hour certain you were the one in control, only to realize every choice you made is now evidence with a timestamp. Imagine watching the walls of your own certainty turn into a record against you. That was what settled over Derek Haynes then, not panic exactly, but the heavy first drop of institutional consequence. Naomi finally spoke, her voice even, precise, almost quiet. "My folder was handled. My credential was seized. I was detained publicly outside a federal building after identifying myself and requesting verification." Sloan gave a short nod, already treating Naomi's words as the most. Credible account in the room. Was any material opened? Naomi glanced at the folder in her hand. No, good, Sloane said. Then she turned back to Derek. That is the only piece of this morning working in your favor. The hallway behind them had filled with careful stillness, officers pretending to move through ordinary tasks while listening to every word. The station no longer felt like a place of local power. It felt like a stage where a larger truth had arrived to name what everyone had just witnessed. Sloane stepped aside slightly, allowing the defense representative his first direct look into the room. He studied Naomi for a moment, then gave a respectful nod. Agent Carter, he said, the briefing has been delayed. They are waiting for you. Naomi returned the nod, then looked once more at Derek Haynes. There was no anger in her face now, no visible satisfaction, no triumph sharpened for revenge. Only a calm so complete it made everyone else feel loud. Derek had spent the morning treating her like someone pretending to belong. Now the highest voices in the room had walked in and made something brutally simple undeniable. She had belonged all along. He was the one who had failed the test. Naomi Carter did not leave the room immediately. That surprised them most. Not because she owed anyone an explanation, and not because she needed more proof that the truth had finally arrived, but because some moments are too important to walk away from before everyone inside them understands what really happened. The interview room stood in a strange hush now, the kind that follows after false confidence burns itself out. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead. The legal pad still sat on the table. The camera in the corner still watched from its dark glass dome. Nothing had changed in the room itself, yet everything inside it had been reordered. Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Sloane stepped aside near the doorway, giving Naomi the space no one had given her on the sidewalk, in the patrol car, or at that metal table. Officer Cole Mercer remained near the wall, his posture quiet, his eyes lowered, already looking like a man who would remember this morning for the rest of his life. Officer Derek Haynes stood where certainty had abandoned him, shoulders still broad, uniform still pressed, badge still pinned to his chest, yet somehow smaller than when the day began. That was the thing about power built on assumption. It could look solid right until truth touched it. Naomi adjusted her coat, slipped her credential fully back into place, and held the leather folder close against her side. Her face did not carry triumph. It carried something heavier than that. Experience. The kind earned by walking into rooms where people decide what you are before they ask who you are. Derek finally looked at her directly, and when he spoke, the words came without edge, stripped clean of every performance he had used all morning. Agent Carter, he said, I was wrong. Naomi studied him for a moment, not as a victim studies a villain, but as one public servant measures another against the damage he chose to ignore. Yes, she said. You were. He swallowed, then tried again. I made assumptions. Naomi gave the slightest nod. You did more than that. Her voice remained level, but every syllable landed with quiet force. You saw a black woman carrying federal credentials near a secured building, and instead of checking facts, you checked whether I looked like someone you were willing to believe. When that answer made you uncomfortable, you turned discomfort into suspicion and called it procedure. No one in the room interrupted. No one could, because there it was, plain at last, the thing that had been moving beneath every choice he made. Not confusion, not caution, bias dressed in the language of authority. Imagine standing there after being doubted, detained, and talked down to, then choosing not to humiliate the people who failed you, but to name the truth so clearly they have to carry it home with them. That kind of restraint does not come from weakness. It comes from knowing dignity is its own form of command. Mercer lifted his eyes then, just briefly, and there was shame in them, but also recognition. He had followed Derek's lead. He had let silence do some of the harm. Naomi saw that too. This system does not fail only when someone acts. She said softly. It also fails when someone watches and decides not to stop it. Mercer lowered his gaze again. Sloane remained still at the doorway, not interfering, because some lessons are more powerful when the truth comes from the person who lived it. Derek looked down at the table, then back at Naomi. I cannot take back what happened, he said. No, Naomi answered. You cannot. She took one step toward the door, then stopped, and turned back one final time. The whole station seemed to listen through the hallway, through half-open doors, through held breath and unfinished paperwork. When she spoke again, Her voice was calm enough to cut deeper than anger ever could. "You saw a black woman pretending to belong," she said. "What you were really looking at was a system revealing itself." The words settled over the room and beyond it, into the hall, into the station, into every mind that had watched the morning unfold and done the math too late. Naomi then walked toward the doorway where Sloan and the defense team waited. No one blocked her path now. No one questioned her name, her badge, or her place. As she stepped into the hallway, officers moved aside without being told. The station had become very quiet, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of reckoning. Outside, Washington was still moving. Traffic still pressed along Constitution Avenue. Flags still stirred in the cold air. Federal buildings still stood in their long winter light, like stone witnesses to stories the public rarely hears in full. Naomi walked through that light with her shoulders steady and her pace unbroken, and somewhere behind her a whole room of people was left to sit with a truth far larger than one bad stop, one wrong arrest, or one humiliating mistake. Because the deepest damage had never been the handcuffs. It had been the instinct that put them on her in the first place. And that was the kind of thing no badge could fix with an apology. Some people wear authority like armor and think it makes them the law. But real justice begins the moment truth walks in and asks a harder question. Not who had the badge, but who had the right to be believed.